Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the guardian of the Phantom Zone. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was made of concrete and indifference. That was the only truth Izuku Midoriya could cling to as his worn-out red sneakers scuffed a mournful rhythm on the pavement. Each step was an effort, a conscious command from a mind that wanted to simply stop. The air, thick with the late afternoon humidity of Mizurufu, felt like a physical weight on his shoulders, pressing him down, down, down into the cracks of the sidewalk. All Might's words were a poison ivy of the soul, their toxic tendrils wrapping around his heart, squeezing until it felt brittle enough to shatter. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic. The phrase replayed in his head, a broken record of his own brokenness. It wasn't said with malice. It was worse. It was said with pity, the kind of gentle, regretful sympathy a doctor gives when delivering a terminal diagnosis. Your dream is dead. Here is a bandage for your hope. Please move along. He clutched the strap of his yellow backpack, the familiar weight of his hero analysis notebooks now feeling like a tombstone he was forced to carry. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. What a joke. It should have been titled Charred Notes from a Dead Dream. Inside, the pages were filled with his frantic, meticulous handwriting, diagrams of support gear, theories on quirk applications, a lifetime of devotion to a religion that had just excommunicated him. His path home should have been a straight line, a familiar route he'd walked thousands of times. But today, his feet had a will of their own, guided by the hollow ache in his chest. They turned him away from the bustling streets, away from the cheerful chatter of other students heading home, away from the ever-present gaze of hero billboards that now felt like monuments to his failure. He found himself walking towards the quiet, overgrown perimeter of Kamino Forest, a stretch of city-managed woodland that most people avoided. It was too dark, too dense, a place where the neat order of the city frayed at the edges. It was perfect. He pushed past the chain-link fence, ignoring the rusted, "No trespassing" sign. The air grew cooler under the thick canopy of cypress and oak. The noise of the city faded into a muted hum, replaced by the chirping of unseen insects and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He walked without purpose, the dappled sunlight painting shifting patterns on the forest floor, each one a fleeting shape he could never quite grasp, just like his dream. He should throw the notebook away. Right here. Let it rot and be consumed by the earth. It was nothing more than a catalogue of his own inadequacy. He reached into his backpack, his fingers brushing against the worn cover. He pulled it out, its weight heavy and final in his hands. He could feel the memory of the sludge villain's slime still clinging to it, a faint, foul reminder of his powerlessness. His arm tensed. This was it. The final, symbolic act of surrender. Giving up. Being realistic. But his fingers wouldn't let go. A choked sob escaped his lips, a raw, ugly sound that was swallowed by the silence of the woods. His body trembled, and he collapsed to his knees, the notebook falling open on the mossy ground. Tears he hadn't even realized he was holding back streamed down his face, hot and blurring the ink on the pages. He was nothing. A quirkless, useless Deku. A boy who couldn't even save himself, let alone anyone else. A fraud who wasted the time of the number one hero. The ivy tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. It was in that moment of absolute despair, as the last vestiges of the afternoon sun began to retreat, that he saw it. Through the curtain of his tears, a light. It wasn't bright or startling. It was a soft, gentle pulse, like a deep-sea creature breathing in the abyss. It emanated from a small clearing a few dozen meters ahead, a rhythmic, ethereal blue that seemed to push back the encroaching shadows. It was strange. It was out of place, and for some reason, it called to the most fundamental part of him, the part that analyzed, the part that was curious, the part that wasn't quite dead yet. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his black gakurin, picked up his notebook, and stuffed it back into his bag. With a final, shuddering breath, he pushed himself to his feet and walked towards the light. The clearing was small, and the source of the light was immediately obvious. In the center was a shallow crater, no more than 3 meters across. The earth was scorched and disturbed, but not in the way a fire or an explosion would have caused. It looked surgical, And nestled in the very middle, half buried in the soil, was an object unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a probe, perhaps the size of a motorcycle helmet, crafted from a material that seemed to be both crystalline and metallic. Its surface was a deep, obsidian black, but it shimmered with an oily iridescence, reflecting the fading light in colors that didn't seem to belong in this world. Intricate, geometric lines, like a fractal circuit board, crisscrossed its surface, and it was from these lines that the soft, blue light pulsed in a steady, calming rhythm, like a slow and steady heartbeat. The air around it hummed with a low, resonant thrum, a sound he felt more in his bones than heard with his ears. This wasn't from Earth. The analyst in him, battered and bruised but not broken, took over. No impact scorch marks on the object itself, suggesting a controlled descent. The crater was fresh, the soil still loose. The energy signature was unlike any quirk he'd ever read about. It wasn't elemental, not psychic, not mutation-based. It was something other. He crept closer, his earlier despair momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound and overwhelming sense of wonder. He circled the crater, his mind racing. Was it a satellite? A weapon? A message? He took a hesitant step into the crater, the loose earth shifting under his sneakers. He knelt before the strange object, close enough now to feel the strange, static energy it emitted prickling his skin. It felt ancient and lonely. Without thinking, driven by an impulse he couldn't explain, he reached out a trembling hand. His fingers, smudged with dirt and tears, hovered over the smooth, alien surface. He hesitated for only a second, then pressed his palm against it. The moment his skin made contact, two things happened simultaneously. First, a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure information, shot up his arm and slammed into his mind. It wasn't images or words, but raw concepts, vast emptiness, cold stars, impossible geometries, the crushing weight of eternity, and a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical blow. Second, the probe went silent. The blue light died. The humming stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound like shattering crystal, a beam of pure white light erupted from the top of the probe, projecting a figure into the air before him. It was a hologram, flickering into perfect focus. It depicted a tall, humanoid figure, impossibly regal and severe. He was clad in long, flowing robes of a silvery, self-illuminated material, adorned with a crest on his chest that Izuku didn't recognize, a stylized S-like shape contained within a pentagonal shield. The man's face was gaunt and impassive, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold the cold wisdom of millennia. His expression was one of absolute neutrality, a judge carved from marble. Izuku scrambled back, falling into the dirt, his heart hammering against his ribs. The hologram's gaze fell upon him. It wasn't a recording. He felt seen, analyzed, dissected. When the figure spoke, its voice was a deep, resonant baritone, impossibly calm and carrying an authority that dwarfed even All Might's. It spoke perfect Japanese, yet the cadence was alien, each syllable precisely and deliberately formed. Entity designation: human. Male. Juvenile. The voice stated, not as a greeting, but as an observation. Biological and chronometric readings are within expected parameters. You are afraid. This is a logical response. Izuku could only stare, his mouth agape. I am the archival consciousness of Warden Unit 734. The hologram continued. My designation is Lorem, Executor of the Kryptonian Juridical Council. This unit's prime directive is the maintenance and guardianship of the interdimensional null-space prison known as the Phantom Zone. Phantom Zone? Kryptonian? The words were foreign, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. This was an alien artifact. A prison guard. My previous guardian perished during this vessel's unscheduled transition through a dimensional schism. Lorem explained, his tone never wavering. The vessel's autonomous systems initiated a search protocol, seeking a replacement. It has been scanning this planet's biosignatures for 3,456 standard hours. The criteria are specific and non-negotiable. Izuku's mind was reeling. A new guardian? Why him? What criteria could he possibly meet? As if hearing his unspoken thought, Lorem's impassive eyes seemed to narrow slightly. A thin, blue beam of light emanated from the hologram, washing over Izuku's body. It didn't feel like a physical scan, it felt like it was reading his very soul. Initial scans were unpromising, the AI stated. This world is saturated with anomalous biological energies you call quirks. These energies introduce unacceptable levels of variance. Physical strength, energy projection, biological manipulation, these are metrics of power, and power is a corrupting agent. A guardian cannot be chosen based on their capacity to dominate. They must be chosen based on their capacity to endure. The blue light intensified, focusing on Izuku's chest. The vessel's deep skin bypassed your species' anomalous genetics. It searched for fundamental character metrics, for the core traits required to interface with and command the Warden's heart, the locus of the Guardian's power. Lorem paused, and for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps surprise, crossed his holographic face. In you, it found them. In concentrations previously thought theoretical. And me? Izuku stammered, finding his voice. It came out as a pathetic squeak. What did it find? Purity of intent, the foundational desire to preserve life and maintain order, untainted by ambition for glory or power. Your desire to save people is absolute, unwavering empathy, the capacity to comprehend and internalize the suffering of others without being consumed by it. A necessary trait for processing the psychic effluent of the zone, compulsive self-sacrifice, a psychological imperative that places the well-being of others above your own, to a degree that is statistically reckless. A guardian must be willing to sacrifice everything to maintain the integrity of the prison. Each word struck Izuku like a physical blow. These were the very things that had defined his life, the things people mocked him for. His reckless rush to save Bakugo, his endless notes on how to help others, his tears for strangers on the news. The world saw it as weakness. This alien machine saw it as a qualification for a sacred duty. The Phantom Zone is not a physical place. Lorem continued, the tutorial-like nature of his speech both calming and terrifying. It is a shade of reality, a metaphysical prison for the most dangerous beings in the known universe. Murderers. Tyrants. Zealots whose power was so great they could shatter worlds. Within the zone, they are rendered incorporeal, deathless phantoms trapped in an eternal, conscious stasis. But their minds, their rage, their despair, they remain. They beat against the walls of their prison like a ceaseless tide. The hologram gestured towards the probe. The Warden's heart is the key. It anchors the zone to a single, living consciousness. The Guardian does not merely watch the prison, the Guardian is the prison. Their will is the lock, their mind the bars. The power it grants is immense, the ability to touch the zone, to manipulate its boundaries, to phase matter in and out of its periphery, to become a living ghost, a warden at the edge of reality. Izuku's head swam. The ability to touch the zone, power. It was power. A way to be a hero. The thought was a flare of light in the crushing darkness of his soul. But Lorem was not finished. It comes with a burden, he said, his voice dropping a fraction of a decibel, the first hint of something approaching a warning. To become the Guardian is to forge a permanent psychic connection to every soul imprisoned within. You will hear their whispers. You will feel their hatred, the unending rage of General Zod, the cold cruelty of his Lieutenant Faurel, the mad ramblings of 1,000 other monsters. Their collective consciousness will become a constant echo in the back of your mind. It is a cacophony that has driven lesser beings to madness. It is a burden that will never, ever leave you. You will never know a moment of true silence again. The flare of hope in Izuku's chest flickered, threatened by a chilling wind. Never know silence again? To live with the hatred of cosmic criminals in his head for the rest of his life? The previous Guardian endured for 8 centuries. Lorem stated flatly. His will was forged from iron. Yours is untested. The probability of psychic degradation is significant. You have a choice. You may refuse. If you do, this vessel will continue its search, though its energy reserves are critical. The zone's integrity will weaken with every passing cycle. There is a non-zero chance of a containment failure. The beings within would spill out into your reality. Your world would not survive. The choice. It wasn't a choice at all. It was the trolley problem on a cosmic scale. His own peace of mind versus the fate of the entire world. But even more than that, it was a chance. The only one he would ever get. All Might had told him to be realistic. Being a quirkless hero was a fantasy. But this was something else. This power wasn't from his body. It was a tool, a responsibility. A burden. Heroes carried burdens. He looked down at his own trembling hands, then back up at the impassive face of Lorem. He thought of his mother's worried face, of Bakugo's sneer, of All Might's pitying smile. He thought of the sludge villain and the feeling of absolute helplessness. Never again. If I do this, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady, surprising even himself. Can I save people? Can I be a hero? The role of guardian is not one of glory, Lorem replied. It is a silent, thankless watch. But with this power, your ability to protect the innocent would be substantial. You would be a hero, in the purest definition of the term. That was all he needed to hear. The ivy around his heart didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. The despair didn't vanish, but it was overshadowed by a new, terrifying resolve. I'll do it, Izuku said, pushing himself to his feet, standing as tall as his 5'5" frame would allow. If my dream requires me to carry the nightmares of others, then I accept. A flicker of light, perhaps the alien equivalent of a raised eyebrow, crossed Lorem's face. Acknowledge and accepted. The bonding sequence will now commence. It will be unpleasant. From the top of the probe, a small, diamond-shaped crystal, no bigger than his thumb, levitated into the air. It glowed with a soft, internal blue light, the same light the probe had been emitting earlier. It hummed with a palpable energy, and Izuku knew instinctively that this was the warden's heart. It drifted towards him, stopping just before his chest. The heart must bond with your core metaphysical and biological self, Lorem explained. Do not resist. Izuku clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He closed his eyes and braced himself. The crystal didn't fly into him. It didn't burn or cut. It simply phased. One moment it was in front of his school uniform, the next it was inside his chest. The sensation was indescribable. It was a cold fire of ice and starlight spreading through his veins. It wasn't pain, not in the physical sense, but it was an overwhelming violation of his very being. He felt his connection to the world warp and stretch. The solid ground beneath his feet felt porous. The air around him felt thin and unreal. He felt the universe expand in his mind, and in that expansion, he felt the cold, empty, terrifying presence of the Phantom Zone. And then, he heard them. It started as a single, faint whisper in the back of his mind, a drop of ink in a glass of water. Kneel. Then another. Kill him. My world for Rao. So cold. Will break you, boy. The whispers became a flood, a cacophony of pure, undiluted malevolence. It was the fury of a forgotten general, the chillingly logical cruelty of a zealot, the insane grief of someone who had lost the world, the petty sadism of a common murderer. 1,000 voices, 1,000 lifetimes of rage, sorrow, and madness crashed into the shores of his consciousness. Izuku screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, and collapsed. His mind was a fortress under siege. The sheer force of the psychic assault was enough to shatter him. He curled into a ball, clutching his head, his teeth grinding. But then, something else rose up within him. The very qualities Lorem had named. His empathy, his desire to save others. He couldn't fight the voices with anger. That would be like trying to fight an ocean with a bucket. Instead, he endured. He absorbed it. He let the pain wash over him, not as a victim, but as a warden. This was his burden. This was the price. Slowly, agonizingly, he began to build walls in his mind. Not walls of anger or denial, but walls of acceptance. He separated the chorus of hate from his own thoughts, compartmentalizing it, acknowledging its presence without letting it become him. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. When he opened his eyes again, the sun had set. The forest was shrouded in deep twilight. The warden's heart in his chest was no longer a searing cold but a dull, constant thrum, a permanent reminder of the bond. The whispers were still there, a constant, low-level hum of static at the edge of his hearing, a room full of murderers murmuring just beyond a closed door. He looked up. The probe was dark, inert. The hologram of Lorem flickered, its form degrading. The transfer is complete, the AI's voice said, now faint and distorted. The warden's heart is yours. My energy is depleted. My archival consciousness will now cease. Wait. Izuku croaked, his throat raw. What do I do? How do I use this power? The heart is a part of you now. Lorem's fading voice echoed in the clearing. Its function is as intuitive as a limb. Reach out, with your will. The rest, you must learn. The watch begins now. The hologram dissolved into a cascade of fading blue pixels, leaving Izuku alone in the suffocating darkness of the forest. He was alone, but not alone. He pushed himself up, his limbs trembling with exhaustion. He felt a strange new energy humming beneath his skin, a chilling power that felt both alien and intimately his own. He was Izuku Midoriya, a quirkless high school student. But he was also something more. Something else. He was the guardian of a cosmic prison. He was the sole defense against monsters that could swallow his world whole. He was the Phantom Warden, and in the terrifying, echoing silence of his own mind, his duty had just begun. The walk home from the forest was a journey through a world that was no longer his own. The familiar streets of Mizurufu, once a backdrop for his daydreams of heroism, now felt thin, like a painted curtain over a gaping, stardusted abyss. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far, every sound was muted, flattened by the ceaseless, internal static that now occupied his mind. The whispers? They were quieter now, a background hum of malice, but they were there. A promise of eternal company. When he finally stumbled through the door to his small apartment, his mother, Inko, took one look at him and gasped. He must have been a sight, clothes stained with dirt and moss, face pale and tear-streaked, eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond adolescent angst. Izuku! What happened? Are you hurt? The sludge villain. I saw it on the news, I was so worried. I'm fine, Mom, he managed, the words feeling thick and clumsy in his mouth. I just fell. In the woods. I'm okay. It was the first lie of his new life, and it tasted like ash. How could he possibly explain? Mom, I met a ghost AI from a crashed alien probe and it embedded a cosmic prison key in my chest, and now I can hear the thoughts of 1,000 genocidal supercriminals. He couldn't even process the thought himself, let alone say it aloud. He spent the rest of the evening in a daze, picking at the katsudon she had made to cheer him up, the taste of his favorite meal lost on him. He could feel her worried gaze on him, but he couldn't meet it. He felt contaminated. A walking, talking haunted house. The warden's heart was a cold, still point in his chest, a physical anchor for the metaphysical storm raging in his skull. Sleep, when it finally came, offered no reprieve. It was a plunge into a sea of disjointed nightmares. He saw burning red suns, cities of impossible crystal architecture crumbling into dust, and faces twisted in sneering rage, their eyes glowing with malevolent power. He stood in a gray, featureless void, surrounded by indistinct, shrieking shapes that clawed at an invisible barrier between him and them, a barrier that felt terrifyingly like his own skin. He woke up with a gasp, his sheets soaked in a cold sweat, the whispers a little louder now, as if his sleeping mind had weaker defenses. Weak, this vessel is so fragile. The boy trembles, good. He knew he couldn't live like this. He couldn't go to school, couldn't face his mom, couldn't function as a human being while this psychic war raged within him. He had to learn control. He had to become the warden, not just in title, but in practice. The next day, he feigned sickness and, as soon as his mother left for work, he slipped out of the apartment and made his way back to the one place on Earth that felt connected to his new reality, the clearing in Kamino Forest. The Kryptonian probe was still there, a dead, dark husk in its crater. It offered no answers. Lorem was gone. The final instruction echoed in his mind, the heart is a part of you now. Its function is as intuitive as a limb. As intuitive as a limb he'd never seen and didn't know how to move. He sat cross-legged before the probe, closed his eyes, and focused inward. He tried to ignore the whispers, pushing them to the periphery as he concentrated on the sensation of the warden's heart. It was a foreign object, yet it was also inextricably part of him. He tried to reach out to it with his will, as Lorem had suggested. He focused on a single oak leaf resting on the ground a few feet away. He wanted to touch it, to move it, without his body. He imagined a thread of his will extending from his chest, from the heart, and wrapping around the delicate stem. Nothing happened. He tried again, harder this time, gritting his teeth. The whispers grew louder, mocking. Pathetic, he struggles to move a leaf. This is our jailer? Shut up! Izuku muttered, his eyes screwed shut. Frustration mounted. He pushed harder, a desperate, raw shove of mental energy. Suddenly, a feeling of vertigo washed over him. The world went gray and silent for a half-second, and a nauseating lurch twisted his stomach, as if he'd just fallen down a flight of stairs in his mind. He opened his eyes. The leaf was gone. Not moved. Vanished. Panic seized him. What had he done? Had he destroyed it? Then, just as suddenly, the feeling returned, a reverse lurch, and the leaf reappeared, tumbling to the ground. It was covered in a fine layer of what looked like frost, and it crumbled into dust the moment it touched the earth. Izuku stared at the spot, his breath hitched. He hadn't just moved it. He had pushed it into the phantom zone. A tiny, temporary banishment. A zone pocket. The sheer, casual reality warping power of it was terrifying. The frost was a testament to the nature of the zone, a place of absolute cold, of entropy. This was not a toy. The next few months became a secret, grueling crucible. His life split into two. By day, he was Izuku Midoriya, a quiet, distracted student at Aldera Junior High, growing thinner and paler, with dark circles under his eyes that made his teachers ask if he was sleeping. He barely spoke to anyone, the effort of maintaining a conversation while simultaneously wrestling with the psychic echoes of alien despots being almost too much to bear. But every afternoon, every weekend, from the moment he could get away until the last light faded, he was in that clearing, training. The forest became his dojo and his sanctuary. He learned not through instruction, but through painstaking, terrifying trial and error. He started with the whispers. He realized he couldn't block them out entirely. Trying to do so was like trying to hold back the ocean with his hands. The pressure would just build until it shattered his concentration. The key, he discovered, was not to block, but to filter. To build mental walls not of stone, but of permeable mesh. He learned to let the tide of hatred flow around his consciousness, acknowledging its presence without letting it drown him. He anchored himself to reality. He would recite the names of his favorite heroes, focusing on their ideals. He traced the patterns on a piece of bark with his finger, concentrating on the physical sensation. He learned a form of meditation born of desperate necessity, finding a quiet center in the heart of a psychic hurricane. Your all might cannot save you here, boy, a deep, arrogant voice, one he was starting to identify as Zod, would often sneer. He taught me what a hero is, Izuku would think back, a silent act of defiance. And that's my anchor. Slowly, his control over his powers began to form. He revisited the zone pocket, learning to control its size and duration with pinpoint precision. He started with pebbles, then larger rocks, then a fallen branch. He learned to open a pocket no bigger than a coin and hold it for a fraction of a second. It was mentally taxing, each use feeling like a dangerous dip into an icy, bottomless lake. Next, he tackled phasing. This was perhaps the most unsettling of his abilities. To phase, he had to consciously will a part of his body to exist partially within the phantom zone. It was a state of being in two places at once, and neither of them fully. The first time he succeeded, he managed to push his hand through a tree trunk. The sensation was horrifying. His hand didn't feel solid anymore. It felt like a cold, buzzing static impression of a hand. He could see the bark and wood of the tree, but he couldn't feel it. Instead, he felt the profound, soul-deep chill of the zone, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The whispers grew sharp and clear, as if he had put his ear directly to the prison wall. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't pull his arm back. He was stuck. Panic flared, and he felt a phantom hand, cold and immense, reach for him from the other side. With a strangled cry, he yanked with all his might, tumbling backward as his arm solidified back into reality, pins and needles shooting up to his shoulder. He lay on the forest floor, panting, for 10 minutes. But he didn't stop. He practiced every day, phasing his fingers, his arm, eventually his whole body. He learned to shimmer in and out of tangibility, becoming a ghostly, translucent figure for a few seconds at a time. It was the ultimate defense, but it came at the cost of feeling his connection to reality fray at the seams. The final ability was the one that felt the most natural, an extension of the will he had always used to fill his notebooks. He called it the Phantom Grasp. It began as he tried to bridge the gap between the brute force of the zone pocket and the defensive nature of phasing. He needed a way to interact with the world from a distance. He focused on a small stone, but instead of trying to banish it, he tried to hold it with the energy of the zone. He pictured ethereal tendrils, made of the same ghostly light as his phased form, extending from him. For weeks, nothing happened. Then, one afternoon, as Zod's voice was particularly loud in his head, bellowing about grasping victory and crushing his enemies, Izuku felt something click. A wisp of gray, shimmering energy, like heat haze on a winter day, leaked from his chest. It snaked through the air and wrapped around the stone. It wasn't solid, but it had presence. He focused, and with a grunt of effort he lifted the stone an inch off the ground. It wobbled in the air, held by his spectral grip. He was ecstatic. It was the first time his power hadn't felt solely like a terrifying burden, but like a tool. Over the next weeks, he refined it. The single tendril became 2, then 4, then a dozen, each capable of moving independently. They were ghostly, silent, and could pass through solid objects to grasp what was on the other side. It was the perfect power for rescue, for disarming, for non-lethal takedowns. It was the most him. The months blurred into a grueling routine of school, training, and sleepless nights. He grew adept at hiding his exhaustion from his mother, but he knew she was worried. He was changing. The timid, tearful boy was still there, but he was now overlaid with a new persona, a quiet, intensely focused young man who carried an invisible mountain on his shoulders. The constant whispers had forced a discipline on him he never knew he possessed. He was no longer just dreaming of being a hero. He was forging himself into one in a secret, silent war no one would ever see. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 10 months after his life had been irrevocably altered in the forest. The UA entrance exam was just a few weeks away. He was walking home, not from the forest for once, but from a bookstore where he'd spent his meager allowance on a new, empty notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 14. It was an act of faith. He was tired. The whispers had been agitated all day, a background chorus of discontent that made his head ache. He took a familiar shortcut through a shopping arcade, his mind already drifting towards the training he planned for the evening, practicing phasing through moving objects. Then he heard the explosion. It was a sharp, concussive boom that rattled the glass storefronts, followed by panic screams. It came from the far end of the arcade. People were running towards him, their faces masks of fear. Smoke began to billow from the narrow street. Izuku's blood ran cold. His first instinct, the old, quirkless Deku instinct, was to run with the crowd. To be a civilian. To be safe. But he wasn't that person anymore. He pushed against the tide of fleeing people, his heart hammering in his chest for a reason that was entirely new. It wasn't just fear. It was the grim, heavy certainty of duty. The warden's heart in his chest thrummed, a low, ominous vibration, as if sensing the conflict. The whispers surged, rising from a hum to a roar, excited by the chaos. Carnage. Show them what real power is. Let them burn. No! He breathed, pushing a fresh wave of psychic noise away, reinforcing the mental walls he had spent months building. He rounded the corner and skidded to a stop. The scene was one of controlled chaos. Pro-heroes, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, were on the scene, holding back the crowd and fighting the fires. But the center of it all, it was him. The sludge villain. The same one that had attacked him, the one All Might had captured. He must have escaped. And he had a hostage. Izuku's stomach plummeted into his shoes. It wasn't just any hostage. The spiky blonde hair, the furious, terrified red eyes, the explosions popping impotently from his palms. It was Kaken, Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, the symbol of everything he could never be, was suffocating. He was going to die. Izuku stood frozen, just as he had been on that rooftop with All Might. But this was different. Back then, he was frozen by despair, by the crushing realization of his own powerlessness. Now, he was frozen by the terrifying weight of his power. He could save him. He knew he could. But it meant revealing himself. It meant using this dark, alien ability in public. And worse, it meant tapping into that power amidst the exhilarating roar of the Whispers, who saw Bakugo's violent struggle and cheered for more. He watched the heroes struggle. Kamui Woods couldn't get a grip. Death Arms was strong but couldn't land a solid blow. It was a stalemate, and Bakugo was the one losing. He saw Bakugo's eyes meet his for a split second, and in them, he didn't see arrogance or anger. He saw pure, unadulterated terror. He saw a kid who was about to die. Something inside Izuku snapped. It was the same reckless, self-sacrificial impulse that had sent him running the first time. The same quality Lorem's probe had identified as essential. But this time, it wasn't just an impulse. This time, he had a plan. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of smoke and ozone. He closed his eyes for a second, not in fear, but in focus. He pictured his mental walls, reinforcing them, turning them from mesh to steel. He acknowledged the Whispers, the chorus of bloodlust, and then he consciously, deliberately, pushed them down, locking them in a soundproof box in the deepest part of his mind. For a precious few seconds, he found a sliver of silence. In that silence, he moved. He didn't run. He walked forward, slipping through the police line as if it wasn't there. A hero shouted at him. "Hey, kid! Get back!" But he didn't stop. He was 10 feet from the melee now. The villain was laughing, a horrible, gurgling sound. Bakugo was thrashing, his explosions weakening. "Okay, Izuku. You can do this. Step 1 phase." He drew on the warden's heart. The world's colors muted to gray. The roar of the crowd, the explosions, the crackling fire, it all faded into a distant hum. A profound chill enveloped him as his body became translucent, a shimmering ghost of gray energy. He took a step, and his foot passed through the cracked pavement. He walked forward, moving through the sludge villain's churning body as if it were smoke. It was a bizarre sensation, a cold, viscous pressure that had no substance. The villain didn't even register his presence. Step 2, secure the hostage. He was inside the morass now, standing right beside Bakugo. He reached out with his now corporeal hands. He had learned to phase parts of his body selectively, and grabbed the collar of Bakugo's uniform. The physical contact was a jolt, an anchor to the real world. Bakugo's eyes widened in disbelief as a seemingly disembodied hand and a ghostly face appeared in the slime in front of him. "Wa Deku?" he choked out. Step 3, banish the core. This was the hardest part. The zone pocket required immense focus. The Whispers, sensing the spike in power, began to hammer against their prison in his mind. He ignored them. He had watched the villain fight. Its movements, its consciousness, it all seemed to originate from its eyes. That was its nucleus. Its core. He pulled Bakugo back with one hand, creating a foot of space. With his other, he thrust his palm forward. He didn't focus on the whole villain. That was too much mass, too chaotic. He focused on a single point in space, a sphere the size of a grapefruit encompassing the villain's eyes. He didn't try to hold it. Just a split second, in and out shunt. He opened the pocket. For an infinitesimal moment, a perfect sphere of reality in front of him twisted in on itself. There was no sound, but the air warped, and for anyone watching closely, a patch of the villain's face was replaced by a glimpse of a black, star-filled void. Then, the pocket closed. The effect was instantaneous and total. The central intelligence of the sludge villain was gone, even if only for a second. The semi-liquid body, no longer held together by a conscious will, lost all cohesion. It was like switching off an electromagnet. The entire mass of sludge collapsed, sloughing off Bakugo and splashing onto the street with a wet, disgusting splat. Izuku, still holding onto Bakugo, solidified fully, the sounds and colors of the world rushing back in. He stumbled, the psychic and physical exertion hitting him at once, and fell to one knee, panting, still gripping a stunned and slime-covered Katsuki Bakugo. Silence. The heroes, the crowd, everyone stared. One moment, a desperate battle. The next, a strange, shimmering boy appears from nowhere, the villain inexplicably collapses into a puddle, and the hostage is free. It didn't make any sense. Then, a shadow fell over them. A booming, familiar voice, filled with a relief that was rapidly turning to utter confusion, echoed through the street. I am here! All Might landed, his signature smile firmly in place, though his eyes were wide with shock. He had been rushing to the scene, preparing to blast the villain apart, only to arrive and see this. He took in the scene, the puddle of inert sludge, a gasping Bakugo, and a pale, exhausted-looking boy with green hair who seemed to have materialized from thin air. The boy who had asked him that question on the roof. The boy he had told to be realistic. Young man. All Might started, taking a step forward. What was that? Your quirk, it's like some kind of teleportation? Izuku looked up, his green eyes meeting the hero's blue ones. He was too drained to speak. The whispers were coming back, a dull, throbbing ache now. He had done it. He had saved Kaken. He had used his power to be a hero. He had passed his first lesson. But as he looked at the bewildered faces of the pro-heroes and the awestruck, confused gaze of the number one hero, he realized the test was far from over. He had just painted a massive, unexplainable target on his back. The 10 months between the sludge villain incident and the UA entrance exam were the longest and shortest of Izuku Midoriya's life. They were an eternity of grueling, secret training, of sleepless nights spent wrestling with the hateful echoes in his mind, and of painstakingly building mental fortifications brick by agonizing brick. They were also a fleeting blink of an eye, a desperate race against a clock he couldn't see, counting down to the day he would have to prove that his newfound burden could actually be used for good. He stood now before the towering gates of UA High School, a cathedral of heroism, and felt none of the starstruck awe that bubbled from the crowd of examinees around him. The other teenagers were a sea of nervous energy, their chatter a mix of boasts, anxieties, and excited speculation. They buzzed with the vibrant, crackling power of their quirks, a symphony of potential that Izuku could almost feel in the air. He, however, was an island of unnerving calm in that sea. The boy who would have been vibrating with a mixture of terror and glee just a year ago was gone. In his place stood a young man who carried himself with a strange, weary gravity. He was still small for his age, his frame wiry rather than muscular, but the timid slump was gone from his shoulders. He stood straight, his posture a constant, unconscious brace against an invisible weight. The most significant change was in his eyes. The wide, innocent green orbs were now shadowed, possessing a depth and focus that was unsettling in someone so young. They were the eyes of a watchman on a lonely, eternal patrol. The whispers were a low thrum in his skull, a familiar companion now. The sheer density of people and quirks seemed to agitate them, like sharks drawn to blood in the water. So many frail bodies, so much ambition, ripe for the breaking. Look at them, Warden, they preen and boast, ignorant of true power. Just a test, Izuku thought back, his mental voice a calm, practiced barrier. This is a gate. I have to pass through it. Nothing more. He clutched the strap of his backpack, the weight of his notebook a familiar comfort. He was here not to fulfill a childhood dream in the way he'd once imagined, not to become the next All Might. He was here because UA was the best place to learn control, to gain experience, to forge himself into a warden capable of wielding his terrifying power without becoming a monster. It was a means to an end, the end being a lifetime of silent, thankless vigilance. Out of my way, Deku, the voice, a familiar gravelly bark, cut through his concentration. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look at him properly. But Izuku caught the sideways glance, the flicker of confusion and suspicion in Bakugo's red eyes. Since the sludge incident, Bakugo had been different. He no longer threw casual insults or physical threats. Instead, he watched Izuku with a simmering, frustrated intensity, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. He had seen something inside that sludge, a ghostly face, a sudden, inexplicable collapse of the villain, and he couldn't reconcile it with the quirkless, useless Deku he had spent his entire life looking down on. Izuku simply stepped aside, offering no reaction. There was no fear, no flinch. The casual cruelty of a schoolyard bully seemed pathetically small compared to the cosmic rage of General Zod. Bakugo seemed to notice the lack of reaction, his brow furrowing in irritation before he stalked off into the crowd. The written exam was a blur of logic problems and ethics questions, which Izuku navigated with the detached focus he'd cultivated over the past months. It was the calm before the storm. The real test was the practical exam, and as he sat in the massive orientation hall, the sheer scale of UA's resources hit him. A booming voice filled the auditorium, shaking him from his thoughts. For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my live show. Everybody say hey. The voice hero, Present Mike, stood on stage, a caricature of energy and volume. Izuku instinctively winced, the sudden noise causing the whispers in his head to spike in annoyance. He took a slow, calming breath, filtering them out. Present Mike explained the rules. A 10-minute mock battle in a massive, simulated city. 3 types of villain robots, worth 1, 2, or 3 points respectively. The goal was to use their quirks to immobilize them and rack up as many points as possible. Izuku's analytical mind, the one part of him that had survived his transformation unchanged, kicked into high gear. Smashing them is the obvious route, he mused, his eyes scanning the robot schematics on the massive screen. But that requires overwhelming power. My abilities aren't destructive. They're subversive. He wasn't a hammer. He was a lockpick. A ghost in the machine. And finally, there's the 4th villain type, Present Mike yelled. The Arena Trapper. It's worth 0 points. Think of it as an obstacle to be avoided. A tall, serious-looking boy with dark blue hair and glasses shot to his feet, his hand raised ramrod straight. Excuse me, sir. A question. On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error for Japan's top hero school. And you, with the curly green hair. Izuku blinked as the spotlight seemed to find him, and the boy, Tenya Ida, he would later learn, pointed directly at him. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, you should leave. A ripple of snickers went through the rows. The old Izuku would have combusted from embarrassment. The new Izuku simply blinked, looked down at the desk where he had been unconsciously tracing diagrams with his finger, and stopped. He offered a small, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement to Ida before turning his attention back to the stage, his expression unreadable. His silence was more unsettling to the surrounding students than any outburst would have been. He wasn't muttering about heroes. He was running threat assessments. He was calculating the energy cost of phasing versus opening a zone pocket, weighing the risk of psychic feedback against the efficiency of a phantom grasp. His world had become one of constant, silent calculation. They were herded onto massive buses and driven to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself standing before Battle Center B, a sprawling, breathtakingly realistic cityscape of towering buildings and empty streets. The other examinees were stretching, showing off their quirks. A girl with pink skin exuded a strange acid. A boy with a laser on his stomach looked like a disco ball. A spiky red-haired kid was hardening his skin. Izuku did nothing. He stood still, his eyes closed, and took a deep breath. He wasn't preparing his body. He was preparing his mind. He found the psychic box where he had locked the whispers during the sludge incident and reinforced its walls. Stay quiet, he commanded them. This is my fight, not yours. A low, resentful grumble was his only reply. He felt a light tap on his shoulder and turned. It was the kind-faced, brown-haired girl he'd seen at the gates. Hi. You seem a little tense, she said, her voice warm and bubbly. I'm super nervous too. It's crazy, right? All this pressure. Izuku looked at her, and for a moment, the warden's mask slipped. He saw her genuine, open expression and felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in months. A simple, human connection. A little, he admitted, his voice slightly hoarse from disuse. Good luck. You too, she chirped, giving him a bright smile before bouncing on the balls of her feet. And begin! Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The other examinees hesitated for a second, confused. What's wrong? The test started. Run! Run! There's no countdown in a real fight. With a collective shout, the crowd surged forward into the city. Izuku took one last centering breath and then followed, not with a frantic sprint, but with a smooth, ground-eating jog. his eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. In a darkened observation room high above the battle centers, a series of monitors displayed the chaos below. The faculty of UA watched with practiced eyes. "That group in Sector B has a few flashy ones," commented the R-rated hero, Midnight. "But flash isn't always substance," grumbled a tired-looking man wrapped in bandages, Shota Aizawa. "Most of them are just running in blind, treating it like a game. They're not thinking." Principal Nizu, a small, white-furred creature in a sharp suit, sat in his chair, sipping tea. "Patience, Aizawa. The true gems often reveal themselves under pressure." On one of the central screens, All Might, in his skeletal true form, leaned forward, his eyes locked on a single green-haired figure. "Come on, young man," he whispered, his voice a low rasp. "Show me what that power is. Show me that you're a hero." Izuku rounded a corner and came face to face with his first opponent. A one-point robot, a sleek, green machine on a single tread, swiveled towards him, its red optical sensor glowing. It raised a piston-like arm to strike. Instead of dodging or bracing for impact, Izuku did something utterly baffling to anyone who might have been watching. He ran straight at it. Just before the moment of impact, a flicker. For a fraction of a second, his body became a translucent gray, shimmering like a heat haze. The robot's arm passed harmlessly through his chest. He was inside the machine's striking range now, his form solidifying. Before the robot could recalculate, he plunged his right hand forward. Again, the phasing effect, but this time, localized just to his arm. His hand and forearm became ghostly, sinking into the robot's armored head as if it were water. He felt the cold, buzzing disorientation of the zone, but he pushed through it, his months of training overriding the instinct to recoil. His phantom fingers found what he was looking for, a thick bundle of power cables. He let his fingers become solid, his grip tightening around the wires. Then, with a sharp, brutal yank, he solidified the rest of his arm and pulled. There was a shower of sparks, a screech of tearing metal and fried circuits, and the robot's red eye went dark. It slumped forward inert, no explosion. No grand display of power. Just a quiet, surgical, and deeply unsettling takedown. He had earned 1 point. He didn't pause to celebrate. He was already moving, his senses stretched, listening for the telltale whir of servos and the crunch of metal feet. Over the next few minutes, he established a rhythm, a deadly and efficient dance. He encountered a pair of two-pointers, bulkier machines with twin cannons. As they took aim, he didn't attack them directly. Instead, he reached out with his will. From his chest, unseen by the naked eye, 2 tendrils of gray, ethereal energy snaked out, his phantom grasp. One tendril wrapped around the ankle of the left robot, yanking its tread out from under it. It crashed to the ground with a clang. The other tendril wrapped around the right robot's cannon, forcibly twisting it until it was aimed directly at its downed companion. The robot, its targeting systems overridden by the strange, intangible force, fired, blasting its partner into scrap metal. Izuku then sent both tendrils to wrench the head of the remaining robot, snapping its connection to its body with a sharp, spectral twist. 3 more points. He was a ghost, a whisper in the urban battlefield. While other students were leveling buildings with their explosive quirks, Izuku left behind a trail of silently disabled machines, many without a single scratch on their outer armor. He saw the pink-skinned girl, Mina Ashido, cornered by 3 one-pointers. She was doing well, melting their armor with her acid, but they were boxing her in. Izuku, from a block away, focused on the ground beneath the lead robot. He opened a zone pocket just big enough to encompass its tread, holding it for a single second. The robot's support vanished, and it pitched forward, crashing into the others and giving Nina the opening she needed to finish them off. She looked around, confused, wondering why it had fallen, but Izuku was already gone. He didn't need thanks. He just needed the rescue points. Back in the observation room, the faculty was silent. "What is his quirk?" Cementos asked, his blocky face a mask of confusion. "First, it's some kind of intangibility. Then, it looked like telekinesis. And just now, did that robot just fall through the street?" Aizawa leaned forward, his tired eyes now wide with intense interest. "He's not destroying them. He's disabling them. Look at his point count." Villain points 14. Low. But his rescue points are off the charts. He's been indirectly assisting other examinees across the entire sector. All Might felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't the quirk of a brawler. It was the quirk of a rescuer. A true hero. But its nature was so strange, so alien. His file says he's quirkless. Another teacher noted, pulling up a holographic display. Nisa chuckled, a high-pitched, slightly unnerving sound. He set down his teacup. Oh, he is most certainly not quirkless. Or, perhaps, the very definition of a quirk is insufficient for what we are witnessing. The principal's black, beady eyes gleamed with a ferocious intelligence. This boy doesn't just manipulate energy or matter. It appears he is manipulating space itself. The laws of physics seem to bend around him. Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. Suddenly, the ground of Battle Center B shook violently. The monitors rattled in their consoles. On the screen, the students below stumbled and fell, looking around in terror. A shadow fell over the city. From between the buildings, a titan of metal and wiring emerged. The zero-pointer. It was colossal, bigger than the tallest skyscraper in the mock city. Its single red eye glowed with menacing energy, and its massive arms could crush a building with a single swipe. Well, Midnight said, a nervous edge to her voice. There it is. The effect on the examinees was instantaneous. Panic. A unified, primal urge to flee. The cacophony of battle was replaced by screams and the thunderous footsteps of the giant robot. 2 minutes left, President Mick's voice announced, adding to the chaos. Izuku stood his ground for a moment, looking up at the mechanical behemoth. The whispers in his head, which had been a resentful grumble, now sang with a kind of dark glee. Now this is power! This is a challenge. Let us tear it apart, Warden. Unleash the zone. No, Izuku thought, his mental voice a cold, hard command. It's a distraction. 0 points. Avoid it. He turned to run, his objective logic overriding the whisper's bloodlust. But then he heard a cry. Ack! My leg! He whipped around. 50 yards away, near the base of the approaching zero-pointer, was the kind-faced girl from the entrance. Uraraka. She had stumbled while trying to escape, and a large piece of concrete, dislodged by the robot's emergence, had pinned her ankle to the ground. She was trapped, directly in the path of the unstoppable machine. The world seemed to slow down. Izuku saw her terrified face, the tears welling in her eyes. He saw the robot's massive, building-sized foot begin to lift, preparing to take another step that would crush her into nothing. Everyone else was running away. The heroes were watching on the monitors, helpless. In this moment, there was no one else. Just him. All Might's words from that rooftop echoed in his ears. You need to be realistic. Punching that thing would be like a fly punching a battleship. He didn't have that kind of power. He wasn't All Might. Smashing was not his way. His way was different. His body moved before his mind had finished the thought, the same self-sacrificial instinct that had driven him to face the sludge villain now propelling him towards a far greater foe. He ran not away from the zero-pointer, but directly at it, his worn red sneakers pounding the pavement. That kid! Aizawa shouted in the observation room. What is he doing? All Might gripped the console, his knuckles white. Young Midoriya. Izuku didn't slow down. The whispers were screaming in his head now, a chorus of exhilaration and rage, urging him to open a massive portal, to banish the entire machine to the cold void. But he knew, instinctively, that he couldn't control that much power. The feedback would destroy him. He needed precision. He needed control. He reached the spot, skidding to a halt just a few yards from the trapped Uraraka. He didn't even have time to try and free her. The robot's foot, a massive slab of metal the size of a house, was already descending, blotting out the sky. He had one chance. One insane, desperate idea. He slammed both of his palms flat against the asphalt of the street, channeling every ounce of focus he possessed into the warden's heart. He wasn't targeting the whole robot. Just a section. A very large, very specific section. What in the world? Cementos murmured, leaning closer to the screen. A visible distortion rippled through the air around the zero-pointer. The space around its massive legs, its treads, its entire lower chassis up to its waist, began to shimmer. A bone-deep cold emanated from Izuku, frost spiderwebbing across the pavement around his hands. The air grew heavy, silent. To the onlookers, it was as if they were suddenly looking at the robot through a heat haze, or warped glass. The lower half of the zero-pointer turned a translucent, ghostly gray. It was still there, a perfect phantom image, but it was no longer fully in their reality. Izuku had done it. He had shunted nearly a third of the colossal machine partially into the phantom zone. The connection to the physical world was severed. The robot's upper half, thousands upon thousands of tons of metal, wiring, and plating, was now without a solid foundation to support it. For a moment, it hung there, suspended by sheer momentum. Then gravity, the one law he hadn't broken, took over. There was no explosion. No mighty crash. Just a surreal, terrifying silence as the massive upper torso of the zero-pointer fell. It passed directly through its own intangible legs and waist, its solid form meeting no resistance from its spectral lower half. It plunged into the street, burying its head and shoulders in the pavement with a ground-shaking, yet strangely muffled, impact that created a massive crater just yards from where Uraraka lay trapped. The immense pressure of the impact, combined with the sudden release of his power, sent a shockwave of psychic and physical feedback coursing through Izuku. It felt like his mind was being torn in two. He was thrown back, his vision filled with stars, the whispers roaring with both triumph and agony. He landed hard on his back, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. The last thing he saw before his vision went dark was Uraraka's stunned, awestruck face, and the silent, decapitated upper half of the zero-pointer sticking out of the ground like a bizarre, modern art installation. The klaxon signaling the end of the exam blared through the silent, dust-filled air. In the observation room, there was a silence so profound it was almost deafening. Teachers stared at the screen, their mouths agape. Aizawa was standing now, his usual apathy completely gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. All Might had sunk back into his chair, his face pale, a single thought echoing in his mind. He didn't break the obstacle. He phased it out of existence. He defied reality to save someone. What are you, my boy? Principal Mizu, however, was not silent. He was leaning forward, his paws steepled under his chin, and a wide, terrifyingly delighted grin was spreading across his face. Well now, he said, his voice a low, excited whisper that sent a chill down the spines of everyone in the room. This changes things. This changes everything. The week between the UA entrance exam and the arrival of the acceptance letters was a strange limbo. Izuku spent it in a state of profound exhaustion, both physical and mental. The stunt with the zero-pointer had taken a toll far greater than mere muscle fatigue. It felt as though he had dipped the entirety of his consciousness into the freezing, abyssal waters of the phantom zone, and the psychic chill lingered, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. The whispers were a constant, agitated buzz, like a disturbed hive. They were resentful of his control but also perversely thrilled by the scale of power he had unleashed. He was sitting at his desk, staring blankly at a page in his newest notebook, when his mother called his name, her voice trembling with excitement. Izuku! It's here! It's from UA! He took the thick envelope, his hands steady. His mother hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands, her anxiety a palpable force in the small apartment. He carefully opened the seal, and a small, metallic disc fell onto his desk. It lit up, and a holographic projection flickered to life. It was All Might, but not in his booming hero form. It was the skeletal, gaunt man Izuku had met on the rooftop, Toshinori Yagi. He looked tired but his eyes held a deep, complicated emotion. Young Midoriya, he began, his voice a low rasp. I am here, as a projection to deliver your results. You passed the written portion of the exam with flying colors. As for the practical, you scored a total of 14 villain points. Izuku's heart, which had been beating with a slow, warden's calm, gave a painful lurch. 14. It was a laughably low score. He had failed. A disappointing number, perhaps, All Might continued, a small smile touching his lips. But that is not the whole story. The projection shifted, showing a grainy video of the battle center. He saw Uraraka, the kind-faced girl, approach President Mike. Excuse me, her projected voice said. That boy, the one with the curly green hair, can I give him some of my points? He saved me. If it weren't for him, I would have been crushed. The scene changed again, showing other students talking to the examiners. Did you see how he disabled those bots to help the girl with the pink skin? He made that one robot shoot the other. It was crazy. All Might's image returned, his gaze intense. In this exam, it was not just about fighting villains. It was about embodying the spirit of a hero. And that spirit is one of self-sacrifice. Of saving others. For that, we award another type of point. Rescue points. A massive golden 60 flashed on the screen behind him. Izuku Midoriya, with 60 rescue points and 14 villain points, you have passed the exam, placing first overall. Izuku stared, speechless. First place? He hadn't been trying to win. He had just been trying to survive and do the right thing. But that is not All Might said, and his expression grew more serious. Another figure appeared beside him in the projection, the small, white-furred, and impeccably dressed Principal Nizu. Mr. Midoriya, Nizu began, his beady black eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was almost alarming. Your quirk has become the subject of considerable discussion among the faculty. Intangibility, spatial manipulation, and what appears to be a form of localized telekinesis. It is a power unlike any we have ever recorded. We at UA are dedicated to nurturing the next generation of heroes, and a potential like yours, so powerful, so versatile, so utterly unique, is something we are eager to understand and help you cultivate. We expect great, and frankly, fascinating things from you. All Might gave a final, encouraging nod. Welcome, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The projection died, leaving Izuku in the sudden silence of his room, the faint, internal hum of the whispers the only sound. He hadn't just gotten in. He had been noticed, and for the first time, being noticed felt less like a victory and more like standing under a spotlight with a secret he could never afford to reveal. The door to Class 1A was obnoxiously large. Izuku paused before it, taking a deep, centering breath. The school was a cacophony of new sounds and sensations, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of his forest training ground. The whispers were agitated, feeding off the ambient energy of so many powerful young people gathered in one place. He pushed them down, reinforcing his mental walls, and slid the door open. The classroom was already buzzing with a chaotic energy that felt alien to him. He recognized several faces from the exam. The serious boy with glasses, Ida, was standing stiffly by a desk. The pink-skinned girl, Ashido, was laughing with a few others. And of course, sitting with his feet propped on his desk, scowling at the world, was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo's head snapped up the moment Izuku entered. Their eyes met across the room. The usual explosive anger was there, but it was now laced with a cold, simmering confusion. He swung his feet off the desk and stomped over to Izuku, stopping directly in front of him, forcing the other students to quiet down and watch. Deku, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. I don't know what kind of trick you pulled at the exam. I don't know what that weird ghosting shit is. But you've been lying to me. Your whole life. Izuku met his gaze without flinching. The old terror he used to feel in Bakugo's presence was gone, replaced by a deep, weary patience. A schoolyard bully was a triviality. I haven't been lying, Kaken, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Don't give me that. Bakugo's palms began to crackle with tiny explosions. You were quirkless. A useless pebble on the side of the road. And now you can walk through walls and take down a robot the size of a skyscraper? What the hell are you? It was the real question, the one that went beyond quirks. Izuku held his ground, the whispers in his head sneering at Bakugo's primitive display of power. Crush him, Warden. Show him what true strength looks like. Izuku ignored them. I'm the same person I've always been, Izuku said, and for the first time, he let a sliver of the immense weight he carried show in his eyes. I just found my purpose. The answer was so simple, so devoid of challenge or fear, that it completely disarmed Bakugo. He stared, searching for the lie, for the mockery, but found only a flat, unnerving sincerity. He couldn't fight it. He couldn't explode it. With a frustrated tch, He turned and stalked back to his seat, leaving a baffled and intrigued class in his wake. Izuku found his assigned seat, letting out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Uraraka, the girl he'd saved. "Hi! I'm Ochako Uraraka. It's great we're in the same class," she said, her smile as bright and warm as he remembered. "That thing you did at the exam was incredible. You just went whoosh and the robot went kerplunk. It was amazing." Before he could respond, Ida marched over, chopping his arm with stiff precision. "I am Tenya Ida. I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. You correctly deduced the true nature of the exam while I failed to see it. I misjudged you." He bowed a perfect 90 degrees. The sudden, friendly attention was more disorienting than Bakugo's hostility. He was trying to formulate a reply when a new voice, tired and utterly devoid of enthusiasm, echoed from the doorway. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up and leave." A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, wrapped in what looked like a yellow sleeping bag, was on the floor. He unzipped himself and stood, revealing a lean man in a black jumpsuit with a scarf of capture weapon draped around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression one of perpetual exhaustion. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. Life is not that forgiving." His tired gaze swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Izuku. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Put these on and meet me on the field." He tossed the UA gym uniform onto his desk. The P grounds were bathed in the bright morning sun. The air was crisp. Aizawa stood before the assembled class, his hands in his pockets. "We're having a quirk apprehension test," he announced, his voice flat. "A quirk test? What about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation?" Uraraka asked. "UA isn't bound by tradition. That applies to its teachers as well," Aizawa said, his gaze sweeping over them. "You've been doing these tests since middle school. Timed runs, jumps, strength tests. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. It's irrational." He tossed a softball to Bakugo. "Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam's villain point tally. What was your best throw in middle school?" 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo strode into the chalk circle, a savage grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a thunderous explosion that ripped through the air, he launched the ball. "Die!" he screamed, as he always did. The ball was a comet, leaving a trail of smoke as it soared into the sky. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum first. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in excited murmurs. "This looks fun!" someone shouted. Aizawa's face darkened. "Fun? You think this is fun?" The temperature seemed to drop. "You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately." Panic gripped the class. Expelled on the first day? It was insane. It was unfair. Izuku, however, felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Expulsion. Compared to the constant, low-grade psychic terror he lived with every second of every day, the threat felt mundane. He had faced down cosmic horrors in his own mind. He could face this. This was just another test of control. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against a boy with a tail. As the starting pistol fired, Izuku didn't burst forward with raw power. He focused inward, drawing on the warden's heart. The world around him flickered for a moment, the colors muting to a soft gray. He willed his body to become partially intangible, shunting a small fraction of his being into the phantom zone. To an observer, it looked like he was surrounded by a faint, shimmering distortion, his form slightly translucent. He ran, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. Air resistance, the friction of the world itself, was lessened for him. He crossed the line in 5.58 seconds. A good time, but not superhuman. Ida, with his engine-powered legs, was far faster, but it was efficient. It was controlled. Test 2, grip strength. This was the one he dreaded. His power was not of the body. He picked up the grip meter, the cold metal a solid, unforgiving reality in his hand. He could have phased his fingers through it. He could have crushed it with a phantom grasp. But that wasn't the test. The test was physical strength. He squeezed, putting every ounce of his normal, teenage muscle into it. The whispers sneered at the effort. So frail, this body is a cage. The digital display lit up, 56 kilograms. A perfectly average, even slightly below average, result. A few students who had seen his display at the exam stared, completely bewildered. The boy who had dealt with the zero-pointer had the grip strength of a librarian. The mystery of Izuku Midoriya deepened. Test 3, standing long jump. He cleared the sandbox easily, using a tiny, focused push from a phantom grasp against his back at the apex of his jump to give him an extra foot of distance. It was invisible, subtle. Another solid, but not spectacular, result. Test 4, repeated sidesteps. His agility was good, honed by months of training in the uneven terrain of the forest. He added to it by slightly phasing his feet every time they touched the ground, reducing the friction and allowing him to shift his weight faster. Again, high marks, born of control, not power. He was performing well, staying safely in the middle of the pack. He was being rational, just as Aizawa wanted. He was conserving his energy, keeping the more reality-defying aspects of his power under wraps. But he knew the final test would be the one where he couldn't hide. Test 5, ball throw. Finally, it was his turn. A few of his classmates were whispering, their curiosity piqued. What would the mystery kid do? He'd shown speed and agility, but no real power. He took the ball from Aizawa, its familiar weight settling in his palm. The teacher's dark, tired eyes watched him, missing nothing. Don't disappoint me, problem child, he murmured, so low only Izuku could hear. Izuku walked into the circle. He took a slow breath, quieting the excited hum of the whispers. They wanted a show. They wanted him to rip a hole in the sky. He would give them something far stranger. He didn't wind up like Bakugo. He didn't roar. He simply brought his arm back in a clean, practiced motion, the kind one would use for a simple pitch. His focus wasn't on his muscles. It was on a single point in space, about a foot in front of his outstretched hand. He poured his will into that point, commanding the boundary of the phantom zone to open. He threw the ball. As his fingers released it, a phenomenon occurred that defied all logic and explanation. The air in front of him did not explode or implode. It simply ceased to be. For a single, silent moment, a perfect circle of impossible blackness, no bigger than a softball, hung in the air. It wasn't a shadow, it was an absence. A window into the void, utterly silent and utterly cold. The ball, traveling at a normal speed, crossed the threshold into that circle, and vanished. There was no sound of it breaking the sound barrier. No sonic boom. There was a soft, final thump, like a door closing on a soundproof room, and the circle of blackness was gone. The ball was gone. The entire class was silent, staring at the empty space where the ball had been. What just happened? Kirishima, the red-haired boy, asked. Izuku lowered his arm, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. That had taken more focus than he'd anticipated. He turned to face Aizawa. The teacher was staring at the device in his hand, his mouth slightly agape. After a moment, he turned it around for the class to see. On the screen was not a number, but a symbol. Infinity. The infinity symbol. A wave of shocked and disbelieving gasps rippled through the students. Infinity? What did that even mean? Bakugo's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. He had launched a ball with the force of a bomb and gotten 705 meters. Deku had performed some kind of magic trick and broken the very concept of measurement. It was illogical. It was impossible. It made a mockery of his power. Aizawa looked from the device to Izuku, and for the first time, a slow, slightly terrifying grin spread across his tired face. Not bad, he said. Not bad at all. The rest of the day was a blur of normal classes, which felt surreal after the morning's test. Izuku sat through English with Present Mike and Modern Hero Art History, the whispers a low, smug chorus in his mind. He was the center of attention, but no one approached him. His display with the ball had been too strange, too alien. He hadn't just shown power, He had shown a defiance of the rules of reality that made the other students' quirks, no matter how flashy, seem conventional. He was the class enigma. The Phantom. When the final bell rang, he packed his bag, eager for the solitude of his walk home. Midoriya! He turned. It was Ida and Uraraka, waiting for him by the door. Your performance today was astounding, Ida declared, chopping his arm for emphasis. Your quirk, it appears to manipulate vector and spatial properties. Does it create a localized wormhole, or perhaps a temporary singularity? The theoretical applications are staggering. I just thought it was super cool. Uraraka added, beaming. It was like, poof! Gone. How'd you do that? Izuku felt a prickle of anxiety. They were friendly, curious, but explaining was impossible. It's complicated, he said, which was the greatest understatement of his life. Of course. A quirk of such complexity would be difficult to explain, Ida said, nodding sagely. I look forward to observing it further. They started walking towards the school gates together. The conversation was light, with Uraraka talking about her reasons for wanting to be a hero, to make money for her parents, and Ida speaking of his family's heroic legacy. Izuku stayed mostly silent, listening. Trivialities. Zod's voice sneered in his mind, a cold drop of poison. They speak of money and legacy while we languished in the eternal cold. They are insects, Warden. Why do you entertain them? Izuku subtly clenched his fist, pushing the voice down. They are my classmates, he thought back, a silent, firm rebuke. Their concerns are not trivial. They are human. What about you, Midoriya? Uraraka asked, turning her curious brown eyes on him. You want to be a hero to save people, right? I can just tell. You have that look in your eyes. He was taken aback. Someone had looked at him, and not seen a weirdo, a weakling, or an enigma, but a hero. The corner of his mouth twitched upwards in a small, unpracticed movement. It was the first genuine smile he had given in months. Yeah, he said, his voice quiet. Something like that. It was a small moment, a single step out of the deep, lonely shadow of his duty. He was still the warden. He was still the keeper of 1,000 nightmares. But as he walked with his new friends, the cacophony of the whispers seemed, for just a moment, to fade a little further into the background, replaced by the simple, hopeful sound of human voices. The novelty of being a student at UE was a thin, fragile veneer over the stark reality of Izuku Midoriya's existence. While his classmates complained about homework or gossiped about pro-heroes, Izuku's mind was a constant, silent battlefield. Every waking moment was an exercise in mental fortitude, a ceaseless effort to maintain the intricate latticework of psychic barriers that kept the whispers at bay. He was learning to categorize them, to recognize the dominant voices in the hateful choir. There was the cold, clinical cruelty of a female voice he'd come to associate with the name Farrell, a voice that analyzed the weaknesses in everything and everyone with chilling detachment. There were the mad, chaotic ramblings of a dozen lesser criminals, a background noise of petty sadism and despair. And then there was the general, the one who called himself Zod. His voice was different. It was a low, resonant baritone of absolute, unshakable authority. It didn't shriek or whine, it commanded. It spoke of destiny, of birthright, of righteous conquest. It was the voice of a fallen king chained in a dungeon, a king who had not for 1 second forgotten that he was born to rule. It was this voice that tested Izuku's walls the most, not with frantic assaults, but with a steady, relentless pressure, a constant search for a single crack in his resolve. These lessons are trivial, Warden, Zod's voice would echo during a lecture on heroics law. Strategy, logistics, the will to power, these are the only lessons that matter. This school teaches you to be a servant. I would have taught you to be a god. Izuku would simply breathe, focus on the words of the teacher, and reinforce the wall. I'm here to save people, he would think back, a mantra of defiance. Not to rule them. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was a microcosm of his new life. The air was filled with the loud, cheerful chatter of his classmates. Kirishima was trying to coax a reaction from Bakugo, Denki Kaminari was cracking jokes, and Tsuyu Azuri was offering her usual blunt, insightful commentary. Midoriya, she said, her large, expressive eyes fixing on him. Your quirk is really strange, but it seems very versatile. Ribbit. Izuku, startled from his internal struggle, blinked. Oh. Thanks, Ajiri. Call me Tsu, she corrected gently. But it doesn't seem like a very flashy quirk for offense, like Bakugo's or Todoroki's. It's more tricky. That's 'cause he's a sneaky bastard. Bakugo growled from across the aisle, not looking at him but clearly listening. Don't trust him. Before Izuku could respond, Kirishima jumped in. Hey, don't be a jerk. It was super manly how he dealt with that giant robot. No hesitation. And that ball throw? That was crazy. Izuku offered a small, non-committal smile and turned to look out the window. He appreciated the defense, but they didn't understand. They couldn't. They saw his power as a quirk, a tool to be used. They didn't feel the humming, malevolent engine it was connected to. They didn't know that every time he reached for his power, he was opening a door to an abyss that was constantly trying to spill into his soul. Their destination was a magnificent, dome-shaped facility. Inside, the sheer scale was breathtaking. It was a sprawling landscape containing meticulously recreated disaster zones, a shipwreck, a landslide, a conflagration, a downtown plaza. Waiting for them was the space hero, 13, their form bulky and obscured by their specialized rescue suit. As 13 began their speech about the dangers of quirks and the importance of using them to save lives, Izuku felt a flicker of resonance. This was his core belief. This was why he had accepted the warden's heart. He was so focused on 13's words that he almost didn't notice the change, a subtle flicker of the lights. A sudden, chilling drop in temperature. And in his mind the whispers, which had been a low grumble, suddenly fell silent. A dead, expectant quiet that was somehow more terrifying than their usual clamor. Then, in the center of the plaza below them, the air began to twist. A pinprick of darkness expanded, swirling into a misty, purple-black vortex. A man with pale blue hair, his face and body obscured by severed hands, stepped out, followed by dozens upon dozens of others, thugs, mutants, villains of every shape and size. And behind them all, a monster. It was a hulking brute, easily the size of All Might, with dark, purplish-black skin, an exposed brain, and dead, beak-like eyes. It stood utterly still, a mountain of muscle and menace. Stay together and don't move, Aizawa commanded, his voice sharp and urgent as he pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. 13. Protect the students. Kirishima took a hesitant step forward. Whoa, is this part of the training? They even got fake villains. Those are not fake, Aizawa said, his capture weapon unfurling around his neck like a striking serpent. They're real. The alarm system isn't working. Someone with a warp quirk is blocking the signal. Kaminari tried to contact the school. As Kaminari fumbled with his headset to no avail, the hand-covered man, Shigaraki, scratched his neck with a dry, rasping sound. Where is he? We went through all this trouble, brought the whole party, and All Might, the symbol of peace, isn't even here. Maybe if we kill a few of his students, he'll decide to show up. The words hung in the air, a declaration of intent so depraved it stole the breath from the students. This was real. This wasn't a test. In that moment of collective shock, Aizawa acted. He leaped from the staircase, a one-man army hurtling towards the mob of villains below. You can't be a hero with just one trick, he muttered as he flew, while Aizawa engaged the villains below in a dizzying display of quirk erasure and close-quarters combat. The misty vortex, a being named Kurojiri, materialized before the students. It is a pleasure to meet you, the swirling mist rasped. We are the League of Villains. We have taken it upon ourselves to enter this bastion of heroes to say hello, and to have your symbol of peace draw his last breath. Before anyone could react, Bakugo and Kirishima leaped forward, launching an explosive assault that was swallowed harmlessly by the mist. My job, Kurojiri's voice echoed, is to scatter you. And to torture you to death. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of purple and black. Izuku felt a sickening lurch as the ground vanished from beneath him. He instinctively reached for his power, not to fight, but to anchor himself. He felt a hand grab his uniform, Mineta, shrieking in terror, and another brush against him, Tsuyu, her expression calm even in the chaos. He didn't have time to phase them all. The warp was too fast, too absolute. He hit the water of the shipwreck zone with a jarring splash, the cold shock a brutal return to reality. He surfaced, sputtering, Mineta clinging to him like a terrified limpet. Tsuyu popped up nearby, unfazed. "We've been separated," she stated, her voice a low croak. "This is bad." Ribbit. The ship in the shipwreck zone was a large, modern vessel. The water around them suddenly churned, and villains with aquatic and mutation quirks began to surround them, their faces twisted in predatory grins. "Look what we have here," one with gills sneered. "A few little tadpoles, all alone." Mineta began to sob. "We're gonna die. I never even got to be popular." The whispers in Izuku's head, silent during the initial shock, now returned with a vengeance, a chorus of dark excitement. "Yes, battle, a true test. That one with the fins. A flick of your will could snap his spine, Warden. Drown them all in this pathetic puddle." "No," Izuku whispered aloud, shaking his head to clear it. He looked at Tsuyu's steady gaze, at Mineta's terrified face. They were his responsibility. He was the Warden. His role was to contain evil, not to become it. "Ajri, Tsu," he corrected himself, "can you get Mineta to the ship?" "I'll hold them off." "Hold them off? With what?" Mineta wailed. Tsuyu looked at him, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Can you?" Izuku didn't answer with words. He took a deep breath and slid under the water. The villains, seeing him submerge, laughed and dove after him, expecting an easy catch. Underwater, the world was a murky green. Izuku opened his eyes, the sting of the chlorinated water nothing compared to the psychic pressure in his skull. He saw 3 villains swimming towards him, one with shark-like features, another with squid tentacles. He reached out with his will. This was his training ground. This was the forest. From his chest, unseen in the murky water, tendrils of gray, ethereal energy, his phantom grasp, snaked out. They were faster and more fluid in the water. One tendril wrapped around the shark man's ankle, yanking him down and slamming him into the floor of the basin. Another pair shot out and tied the tentacled villain's own limbs into a knot. A third disarmed another villain of a crude harpoon gun. It was silent, efficient, and utterly baffling to his opponents. He resurfaced near the ship just as Tsuyu was depositing a whimpering Mineta on the deck. "Midoriya!" she called, her eyes wide. "What did you do?" "Just created a distraction," he said, pulling himself onto the deck, his gym uniform soaked and clinging to him. He looked down at the water. The villains were floundering, confused and disoriented, some fighting each other in their panic. Before they could regroup, he looked at Mineta. "Mineta, your quirk. The balls from your head, they're super sticky, right?" "Why yeah," he stammered. "Throw them in the water. As many as you can." Understanding dawned on Mineta. With a renewed, albeit panicked, vigor he began plucking the purple spheres from his head and tossing them into the water. They bobbed on the surface, creating a massive, inescapable sticky trap. The villains, trying to swim to the surface, became hopelessly ensnared. "We need to get to Mr. Aizawa," Izuku said, his eyes scanning the dome, trying to assess the situation in the central plaza. "He's fighting too many of them alone." By the time they reached the edge of the plaza, hiding behind a large fountain, the scene was far worse than they could have imagined. Aizawa, for all his skill, was being overwhelmed. The man with the hands, Shigaraki, was monologuing, but the real threat was the monster. The Nomu. They watched in horror as the Nomu caught Aizawa's punch, then systematically broke his arm. It grabbed his head and slammed it into the pavement with a sickening crunch. Even with his quirk erasing the Nomus, the creature's raw, physical power was overwhelming. "Mr. Aizawa," Tsuyu whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Izuku felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. His teacher was being murdered in front of him. The whispers were ecstatic. Brutality. Pure, mindless strength. A beautiful weapon. Zod's voice was laced with something like professional admiration. But it is untamed. A guardian must be able to put down such beasts. Shigaraki turned his attention from the broken form of Aizawa to the 3 students who had just arrived. "You're here. And All Might is still a no-show. It's game over." He began to walk towards them, his movements jerky and unnatural. "But before we leave, Let's smash some of his pride. He lunged, his hand outstretched, aiming for Tsuya's face. Izuku moved. He didn't think. He reacted. He shoved Tsuyu out of the way and prepared to meet Shigaraki's attack, planning to phase his own body at the last second. But Shigaraki's hand stopped an inch from his face. His decay quirk hadn't activated. Izuku looked up and saw Aizawa, his face a bloody mask, forcing his head up from the pavement, his eyes glowing red as he activated his quirk one last time. Shigaraki snarled in frustration. You really are cool, Eraserhead. The Nomu, on Shigaraki's unspoken command, grabbed Aizawa's head again and slammed it into the ground, finally knocking him unconscious. This was it. They were next. Shigaraki was about to attack again when a thunderous boom echoed from the entrance of the USJ. The doors were blown inwards. All Might stood there, and he was not smiling. His face was a thunderous mask of pure, righteous fury. The arrival of the number one hero changed the dynamic, but Shigaraki was not afraid. He was gleeful. So you're here after all, he rasped. Our main boss. What followed was a battle on a scale Izuku had only ever seen on television. All Might was a blur of motion, dispatching the remaining low-level villains and saving the unconscious Aizawa in seconds. But when he faced the Nomu, his unstoppable force met its immovable object. Every punch All Might threw, every blow that could level a city block, was absorbed by the creature as if it were nothing. It's no use. Shigaraki cackled. Noma has shock absorption. The only way to hurt him is to slowly gouge out his flesh, but he'd just regenerate before you could. He's a bioengineered punching bag designed specifically to kill you at 100% of your power. The battle raged, but All Might was being pushed back, trapped in the Nomu's unbreakable grip, his back being slowly crushed. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki arrived, creating a brief distraction that allowed All Might to escape, but it wasn't enough. The Nomu was unkillable by conventional means. All Might was weakening. Izuku could see the steam beginning to rise from his body, a sign that his time limit was approaching. He was going to lose. The symbol of peace was going to be killed right here, and the world would fall into darkness. It was in that moment of stark, terrifying clarity that Izuku knew what he had to do. Physical attacks didn't work. Energy attacks didn't work. But the Nomu was a physical being. It existed in this reality. And Izuku Midoriya was the warden of another. He stepped out from behind the fountain, his movements calm and deliberate. Midoriya, what are you doing? Get back! Kirishima yelled. Izuku ignored him. He walked forward, his eyes locked on the monstrous form of the Nomu. He could feel the raw, chaotic energy radiating from it. It wasn't just mindless. It was an aberration, a patchwork of stolen quirks stitched together into something that should not exist. Warden, Zod's voice rumbled in his mind, a low, dangerous growl. This creature is an affront to nature. It is a tool, not a warrior. Put it in a cage where it belongs. For the first time, Izuku found himself in agreement with the general. He planted his feet, the worn soles of his red sneakers gripping the cracked pavement. He could hear the shouts of his classmates, the worried cry of All Might, but they all faded into the background. There was only him, the monster, and the abyss he commanded. He reached down, deep inside himself, and took hold of the warden's heart. He didn't just ask for its power, he demanded it. He poured his will, his focus, his very essence into a single, overwhelming command: banish. The air around the Nomu began to warp. A visible distortion, like looking through superheated glass, shimmered into existence, creating a bubble around the creature. The temperature plummeted. A fine layer of frost spiderwebbed out from Izuku's feet, cracking the concrete. The whispers in his mind roared, a tidal wave of psychic energy that he was now channeling, not resisting. Shigaraki stopped scratching his neck, his red eyes widening behind the hand on his face. What is this? Another cheat? The Nomu, for the first time, seemed to react to something other than a physical blow. It twitched, its head swiveling towards Izuku, its dead eyes showing a flicker of something. Confusion? Pain? Young Midoriya, stop! All Might yelled, recognizing the immense, unnatural power rolling off the boy. But Izuku couldn't stop. It was like holding on to a runaway train. He was pushing with all his might, trying to shove the Noma's entire existence into the phantom zone. He could feel the boundary giving way. The Noma's form began to flicker, turning translucent at the edges. He was succeeding. Then, something went wrong. The Noma's shock absorption quirk was not just for physical blows. It was an absolute, conceptual power. As Izuku poured reality warping energy into it, the Noma began to absorb it, and its chaotic, mindless nature corrupted that energy, reflecting it back at Izuku in a wave of pure, psychic chaos. It was a feedback loop from hell. The psychic force slammed into his mental barriers, not like a wave, but like a shaped charge. The intricate walls he had spent 10 agonizing months building, the careful filters, the mental locks, they didn't just crack. They were obliterated. Vaporized. For a terrifying, silent moment, there was nothing between Izuku Midoriya's consciousness and the full, unrestrained malevolence of the Phantom Zone. And in that moment of absolute vulnerability, the general seized his chance. A pain unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced erupted in his skull. It was the feeling of his own soul being evicted, of a will forged in war and genocide overriding his own like a virus. His vision swam, turning a deep, bloody crimson. His thoughts, his fears, his hopes, they were all drowned out by a single, titanic consciousness, a being of monumental ego and rage. The students watched in horror as Izuku's body went rigid. He threw his head back, a silent scream contorting his face. Then, he slowly lowered his head, and the boy they knew was gone. His posture had changed. He stood taller, impossibly arrogant, a commander surveying a battlefield. The green, innocent light in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a burning, furious crimson glow that seemed to emanate from within. When he spoke, his voice was a terrifying harmony, a layered duet of a teenage boy and an ancient, alien warrior king. And the language he spoke was not Japanese. It was a harsh, guttural tongue that grated on the ears, a language of conquest and sorrow. Kneel before Zod. The psychic backlash of the shattered connection and the raw, alien power that now possessed Izuku's body erupted outwards. He didn't fall back. He was thrown back, tumbling through the air like a discarded doll, landing in a heap 20 feet away, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The distortion around the Noma vanished. The creature stood there, whole, but it was flickering. Parts of its body shimmered with a ghostly translucence, and it seemed disoriented, its head twitching. The feedback loop had damaged it, weakened its anchor to reality, but it had not banished it. The plaza was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the heroes. Shigaraki stared, first at the weakened Noma, then at the unconscious boy, a look of utter confusion on his face. All Might, however, was staring at the spot where his successor had stood, his heart frozen in his chest. He had heard the voice. He had seen the eyes. He had felt the sheer, unadulterated wrongness of that presence. It was not the power of a hero. It was something ancient, something terrible, something that had worn his student's face and spoken in a dead language, a language of command. That single, terrifying moment of transformation had scared him more than the Nomu, more than Shigaraki, more than his own impending time limit. With a roar born of fear and fury, All Might turned back to the Noma. He had to end this. He had to get to young Midoriya. He had to get answers. The fight was no longer just for the students, it was for his boy's very soul.